The Interstellar Survival Certification Program had been operating for approximately 300 standard cycles, and in that time it had developed a reputation for being thorough, unbiased, and occasionally fatal. Not frequently fatal, mind you. The organizers were not monsters, but when you are testing the survivability of species across 17 different environmental classifications, sometimes a candidate gets a little too confident about their ability to withstand a methane storm or resist the gravitational pull of a collapsed star fragment. The committee had very nice condolence protocols. They sent flowers. Well, the equivalent of flowers. For some species, that meant flowers. For others it meant ceremonial spores or bioluminescent fungi, or one memorable case involving a jar of consecrated minerals. The program existed because the galaxy had learned a hard lesson about assumptions. 3 centuries prior, the Confederation had nearly appointed the Valorians as the primary rescue and recovery force for deep space emergencies, right up until someone discovered that Valorians could not in fact survive in anything below 15 degrees Celsius. This was discovered when a Valorian rescue team arrived at a distress beacon in a temperate zone and immediately went into thermal shock. The beings they were supposed to rescue ended up rescuing them. It was embarrassing for everyone involved, and the Confederation had never quite lived it down in the intergalactic news cycles. Thus, the Survival Certification Program was born. Every species that wanted to participate in emergency response, colonization efforts, or really any activity that might involve encountering weather, had to prove their mettle across various environmental challenges. It was a sensible policy, and it had prevented countless deaths and significantly reduced the amount of paperwork involved in cross-species rescue operations. The testing committee for this particular cycle consisted of 3 distinguished members. Commander Vexthor was a Saurian from the temperate forests of Skaldros, whose scales shifted from deep emerald to annoyed crimson depending on his stress levels. They had been shifting toward crimson quite a bit lately. Dr. Zilnak represented the insectoid Chetin collective, her compound eyes capable of perceiving 17 different spectrums of light, which meant she could literally see problems coming from multiple angles. And Observer Krell, a crystalline being whose species experienced time slightly differently than everyone else, which made him either incredibly patient or incredibly bored. No one was quite sure which. Today they were processing a human. Humans had been classified as a Category 3 survivalist species, which placed them somewhere between the robust but unimaginative Torthans and the adaptable but fragile Pinions. It was a middle-of-the-road rating, the kind of classification that suggested competence without particular distinction. The committee had tested 4 humans previously, all of whom had passed their assigned challenges with what the reports described as adequate performance. Adequate. The galaxy's most damning praise. The human currently sitting in the preparation chamber was named Marcus Chen, and he had arrived with what he called camping gear. The gear consisted of a thermal suit that looked insufficient by any reasonable standard, a backpack that seemed too small to contain anything useful, and an expression of mild enthusiasm that suggested he thought he was about to have a pleasant afternoon rather than fight for his life against hostile elements. Commander Vexthor reviewed the test parameters one final time. Cryos 9, a frozen moon orbiting a gas giant in the Helios sector. Baseline temperature of -40 degrees Celsius, with winds that could strip exposed flesh from bone. Well, species that had flesh. The Saurian had selected this challenge personally because humans came from a world with frozen regions, so clearly they should be tested in a frozen region. It was only logical. The survival threshold was 72 hours. Food, water, and basic materials were provided in a supply cache. Shelter was not. The human would either build something or freeze. Simple. Marcus listened to the briefing with the attention of someone who had heard similar speeches before, nodding at the appropriate intervals and asking clarifying questions that actually made sense. Could he use materials from the environment? Yes. Were there any restrictions on construction? No, as long as it did not involve technology beyond simple tools. Would there be medical extraction if he signaled distress? Immediate. He did not ask about the temperature. Vexthor found that mildly concerning but attributed it to human bravado. They were a proud species, according to the files. Prone to stubbornness. The transport deposited Marcus on the surface of Cryos 9 at the beginning of the testing cycle. The committee watched from the orbital monitoring station, their screens displaying thermal imaging, vital signs, and multiple camera angles. Zilnak had already started a betting pool on how long before the human activated his distress beacon. She had put her credits on 18 hours. Vexthor had been more generous with 24. Krell, who existed partially out of sync with normal time, had simply said the human would surprise them and refused to elaborate. Hour 1 began with Marcus doing something the committee had not anticipated. He started examining the snow, not just looking at it, examining it. He crouched down, scooped up handfuls, compressed it between his gloved hands, and actually appeared to be testing its structural properties. Then he began cutting blocks, large rectangular blocks of snow. Dr. Zilnak's antenna twitched in confusion. Her translator unit struggled with the concept before settling on a rough approximation. He is stacking frozen water into a geometric configuration. Commander Vexthor leaned forward, his scales flickering between green and yellow, which indicated puzzlement. Why is he building with the precipitation? The human continued, utterly unbothered by the negative 40-degree temperature or the wind that was beginning to pick up. He arranged the blocks in a circular pattern, each layer slightly inward from the last, creating a dome structure that grew steadily upward. The precision was remarkable. Each block was sized and shaped specifically for its position. The gaps between blocks were filled with loose snow that Marcus packed carefully into place. It took 3 hours, but when he finished, there was a complete hemispherical structure sitting on the ice plain. An igloo, according to the human cultural database that Dr. Zilnak frantically consulted. A traditional shelter used by indigenous populations in Earth's Arctic regions, constructed entirely from compressed snow, capable of maintaining internal temperatures significantly higher than external conditions through a combination of insulation and body heat. The alien committee stared at the screens in silence. He built a house, Vexthor said slowly. Out of snow, Dr. Zilnak was recalculating her bet. The structural engineering is actually sound. The compressed snow creates an insulating barrier, and the dome shape distributes wind pressure efficiently. It is not aesthetically pleasing, but it is functionally brilliant. Marcus, visible through the thermal imaging as a warm shape inside the igloo, appeared to be settling in quite comfortably. His vital signs were stable. His core temperature had not dropped at all. He was arranging his supplies inside his new home, humming something that the audio pickups could not quite identify. Observer Krell made a sound like wind chimes, laughing. "I told you he would surprise you." The committee upgraded their estimation, perhaps 36 hours before distress signal. Humans were clearly more resourceful than initially assessed. Hour 12 arrived, and Marcus emerged from his igloo looking refreshed. He had slept, actually slept, in negative 40-degree weather inside a structure made of frozen water, and somehow survived the night without incident. Commander Vexthor was beginning to develop what his species called a reasoning headache, which was the cognitive equivalent of a muscle cramp. Marcus stretched, looked around at the frozen landscape with the expression of someone evaluating a mildly interesting parking lot, and then began walking. Not aimlessly. With purpose, he was gathering materials. Stones, first. Flat ones from an outcropping approximately half a kilometer from his shelter. He made 3 trips, carrying armloads of rocks back to his igloo each time. Then he began arranging them in a circular pattern near the entrance of his shelter, constructing what appeared to be a contained pit. Dr. Zilnak felt her compound eyes strain as she tried to process what she was seeing. Is he building a combustion chamber? He cannot be building a combustion chamber, Vexthor replied, but his tone suggested he knew that Marcus absolutely was building a combustion chamber. Marcus, unaware of or unconcerned by the alien consternation he was causing, finished his fire pit construction and began the significantly more challenging task of creating fire. He used a magnesium fire starter from his supplies, which was permitted under the basic tools allowance, and small pieces of dried organic material that he had somehow procured. Where had he gotten combustible material on an ice moon? The committee checked the environmental logs. There was lichen, dried, frozen lichen that clung to the undersides of rocks. Marcus had apparently spotted it during his material gathering and recognized it as fuel. The fire caught. Small at first, then growing as Marcus carefully fed it with the lichen and some kind of compressed fuel blocks that he had fashioned from his own supplies mixed with the organic material. The flames danced in the fire pit, and Marcus constructed a chimney system using additional snow blocks and a carefully angled vent that directed smoke away from his shelter. There was fire on an ice planet. The human had brought fire to a frozen moon. This is not survival, Commander Vexthor said, his scales now fully crimson. This is habitat establishment. This is colonization behavior. Marcus, visible now in normal visual spectrum thanks to the firelight, was melting snow in a container over his fire, purifying water through boiling, creating a renewable source of hydration that required no rationing of his supplied resources. Dr. Zilnak updated her assessment files with trembling manipulator appendages. The human is displaying Category 7 adaptive behavior. This is incorrect. Humans are Category 3. The files are wrong, or this specimen is an outlier. Krill chimed thoughtfully. Perhaps your categories are insufficient. The committee did not sleep that night. They watched Marcus sleep comfortably in his igloo beside his fire, warm and hydrated and showing no signs of distress whatsoever. Hour 36 marked the point when the committee realized they had made a terrible miscalculation about humans in general, and Marcus Chen in particular. Marcus emerged from his igloo at the start of the new day cycle, looking like someone who had just enjoyed a pleasant weekend getaway. He stretched, checked his fire, added more fuel, and then began what could only be described as construction expansion. He started building a second chamber adjacent to the first igloo. This one was smaller, more rectangular, with a connecting tunnel to the main shelter. The committee watched in mounting horror as Marcus created what he casually referred to, in his audio log, as the kitchen. The kitchen. He was not supposed to have a kitchen. He was supposed to be struggling for survival, rationing his supplies, conserving his energy, and hoping desperately that the 72 hours would pass quickly so he could return to civilization and warmth and comfort. Instead, Marcus was engaging in meal preparation. He arranged his food supplies on shelves carved into the ice walls. Shelves carved into ice. He created a flat working surface at waist height. He organized his materials by category and use case. He fashioned cooking implements from the provided materials, bending metal from supply containers into crude but functional pots and utensils. And then he cooked, not simply heated rations. He actually combined ingredients, applied thermal energy in controlled amounts, and produced what the olfactory sensors identified as a nutritionally balanced chew with enhanced flavor profiles. The human was cooking gourmet meals on an ice moon. Commander Vextor had moved beyond crimson scales into a color that the saurian species reserved for moments of complete existential confusion. A sort of pulsing purple that indicated his worldview was being fundamentally challenged. Dr. Zilnak had given up on her assessment files and was simply recording everything with the numb efficiency of someone who knew their report would be rejected as fabricated. Observer Krell was humming, which was his species' equivalent of smug satisfaction. Marcus finished his meal, cleaned his cooking implements with heated water, and then began the most offensive project yet. He carved furniture, ice furniture, a bench, a table, storage containers with fitted lids. He was interior decorating. At hour 40, Marcus waved at one of the cameras, clearly aware he was being monitored, and gave a cheerful thumbs-up gesture that translated across most species as a signal of positive status. The committee did not wave back. They were busy having an emergency meeting about test protocol integrity. Hour 60 arrived with a complication. The weather on Krios 9 took a turn for the worse, as it occasionally did. A blizzard system moved in, dropping temperatures to negative 60 degrees Celsius and reducing visibility to nearly zero. Winds increased to dangerous speeds. This was the kind of environmental event that the committee had been hoping for, the natural challenge that would push the human to his limits and remind him that he was, in fact, in a survival situation rather than on some kind of demented camping holiday. Marcus responded to the blizzard by staying inside his shelter complex, feeding his fire and reading something on a small electronic tablet that apparently contained his personal entertainment library. He was reading. During a blizzard, on an ice moon, his vital signs remained perfect. His shelter did not collapse. His fire, protected by the intelligent design of his chimney system, continued burning steadily. He ate another cooked meal. He appeared to take a nap. The blizzard raged for 8 hours. Marcus experienced exactly zero distress. When the weather cleared, he emerged, assessed the snow accumulation, cleared the entrance to his shelters with a shovel he had fashioned from salvaged materials, and then began another project. He built a third structure. This one was different, long and low with racks inside. A smoking chamber for food preservation, according to his audio log. He was creating a system for long-term resource management that extended far beyond the 72-hour test window. Then he made snowshoes. Actual snowshoes, using woven strips of synthetic material from his supply containers and curved branches from the frozen lichen growths. He tested them, adjusted the bindings, and then went for a walk across the ice plain, moving at approximately 3 times the speed he had managed before, with significantly less energy expenditure. He established a perimeter marking system using rocks and piled snow, creating visible boundaries around his settlement. It was no longer a survival shelter. It was a settlement. At hour 68, Marcus began building a storage cache at a location 200 meters from his main igloo. He stocked it with preserved food, a fire-starting kit, basic tools, and a carved ice plaque with instructions in multiple languages explaining how to use the shelter and resources. For future travelers, he explained to the camera, in case someone else gets dropped here for testing. No point in letting good infrastructure go to waste. Commander Vextor was experiencing a full cognitive breakdown. Dr. Zilnak had started 3 separate incident reports and abandoned all of them as inadequate. Observer Krell was practically vibrating with amusement. The 72-hour mark arrived with fanfare that only the committee could appreciate. The extraction team was dispatched to retrieve Marcus Chen and return him to the station for debriefing and medical evaluation. They found him outside his Igloo complex, apparently reluctant to leave. "Do I have to go right now?" Marcus asked the extraction team leader. "I was thinking about adding a windbreak wall on the eastern side. The prevailing winds come from that direction, and it would really improve the overall comfort level." The extraction team, professionals trained to deal with traumatized survivors, had no protocol for dealing with a test subject who wanted to continue habitat improvements. They politely insisted. Marcus complied, but not before giving his settlement a final inspection, banking his fire so it would burn safely for several more hours, and leaving detailed notes in the storage cache about his construction techniques and resource management strategies. The medical evaluation on the station showed that Marcus was in perfect health. Better than perfect health, actually. His muscle tone had improved slightly from the physical activity of construction. His mental state was positive. His stress hormones were lower than baseline, suggesting that he had found the experience relaxing. He had gained weight. The human had gained weight during a survival test on an ice moon. The debriefing session was uncomfortable for everyone except Marcus, who seemed genuinely pleased with his performance and kept asking if he had passed the certification. "You, Commander Vexthor," began, his scales now a color that did not exist in the standard Saurian emotional spectrum, built a residential complex. "Well, it was pretty basic," Marcus replied modestly. "If I had more time, I would have really developed the infrastructure. Maybe set up a better water collection system, expand the food storage, possibly dig down for a lower level to take advantage of geothermal." "You were supposed to survive," Dr. Zilnak interrupted. "Survive, not thrive, not colonize. Survive." Marcus looked genuinely confused. "I mean, yeah, I survived. Obviously. It was not that hard. The test conditions were pretty mild compared to actual winter camping back home. No storms until day 3, plenty of building materials, decent visibility most of the time." "Mild," Vexthor repeated. -40 degrees Celsius is mild." "Oh sure, for a winter environment," Marcus shrugged. "I have been backpacking in worse. There was this trip in Patagonia where we got caught in a whiteout at about -50 with no shelter at all. Had to dig a snow cave in about 20 minutes before the frostbite set in. That was intense. This test was way more comfortable. You guys gave me plenty of time to set things up properly." The committee exchanged glances that communicated several hours' worth of conversation in a single moment of shared existential dread. So Marcus continued cheerfully, "Did I pass?" 6 months later, the Interstellar Survival Certification Program implemented sweeping changes to its classification system and testing protocols. Humans were reclassified as a Category 9 adaptive survival species, with a special notation that they were to be considered extreme hazard candidates for any colonial or emergency response operations. Not because they could not handle difficult environments, but because they handled them too well and tended to get ambitious. The test site on Cryos 9 became something of a landmark. Marcus's Igloo complex, still standing despite several blizzard seasons, was officially designated as an emergency shelter by the Confederation. 3 separate species had used it since Marcus's departure, and all of them had left reviews. 4 stars. Warm, good fire setup. Interior decoration needs work. The committee had also added a new rule to the test materials list. Under no circumstances should humans be provided with building materials, cooking equipment, or anything that could be remotely construed as a construction tool. Not that it mattered. Humans, they had learned, did not need to be provided with materials. They would simply find them, or make them, or somehow convince the environment itself to donate resources to their cause. Commander Vextor had retired from the testing committee to pursue a quieter career in botanical documentation. Zilnak had been promoted to program director, where she immediately implemented mandatory psychological screening for committee members because watching humans test had proven to be more stressful than anyone had anticipated. Observer Krell remained on the committee and was rumored to be enjoying himself immensely. As for Marcus Chen, he returned to his primary occupation on Earth, which the committee discovered during a routine follow-up assessment. They had been expecting to find a military survival specialist, or perhaps an extreme environment researcher, or at the very least a professional wilderness guide. Marcus was an elementary school teacher with a hobby interest in camping. An elementary school teacher with a hobby interest. The committee had very carefully asked about other humans who were actual survival specialists. Professionals, experts. "Oh sure," Marcus had replied. "There are people way more intense than me. I just like casual camping trips. You know? The real outdoors experts do crazy stuff, like multi-month Arctic expeditions, solo desert crossings, deep wilderness survival courses. I am pretty basic compared to them." The committee had not asked any follow-up questions. They did not want to know. They absolutely did not want to know. Back on Earth, Marcus Chen was teaching his 4th grade class about their solar system and telling them about the fun winter camping trip he had taken to a frozen moon. The children listened with wide eyes, and several of them asked if they could go winter camping too. Marcus smiled and told them that when they were a little older, he would be happy to take them on a basic snow shelter building expedition. Nothing too extreme. Just a nice weekend trip to learn fundamental skills. And somewhere in orbit around a distant gas giant, on a frozen moon named Krios 9, an igloo complex stood against the endless winter, waiting for the next visitor who might need shelter. There was still firewood stacked inside. The storage cache remained stocked. The carved instructions were clear and helpful. The galaxy had learned something important about humans during that 72-hour test. Humans did not simply survive harsh environments. They looked at harsh environments and saw potential. They saw projects. They saw opportunities to build something better, to create comfort from hardship, to turn survival into living. It was terrifying. It was impressive. It was, in the opinion of every species that had reviewed the test footage, the most human thing imaginable. And Marcus Chen, elementary school teacher and casual camping enthusiast, never did understand what all the fuss was about. It had just been a nice relaxing trip to practice his igloo building skills. Maybe next time they would test him somewhere more challenging. The committee had never sent him that next test assignment. They were still recovering from the first one.